Hey, today I'll be going through some useful tips for when you're starting out with watercolors or you're having a hard time using them. The first thing you'll need will be a palette. It can be like this one, or even a plate. I will be using this type of watercolors that come in a tube, but all of these tips work for any type of watercolors, capsules or any other kind. The first thing I would like to say is that you don't need a lot of paint to paint with watercolors. I think one of the things that is more daunting when you're first starting out is the idea of water. And that would be my first tip. Don't be afraid of water. When you're painting with watercolors, you're not painting with the paint directly from the tube, like with other mediums. You're essentially painting with the colored water. I usually add the water with my brush and the paint little by little, but here I'm doing it the other way around. I'm adding almost the same amount of color in each one, and I will be adding more and more water to each one so you can see it more clearly. Even in the palette you can see that the one with less water is more opaque and the color is brighter and more intense, and the one with more water is more transparent and the color is a lot lighter. The transparency lets you see the paper below, so that's why watercolors seem so bright and you can see several layers because they don't cover the ones below completely. When you paint, you choose how much water you will use, and that's how you control the transparency or the intensity of the color of your painting. In this example, you can see very clearly that with the same color you can get many different tones just by adding more or less water. I let the first layer dry completely, so this way if I paint over it, the layer below won't move. With the same color of paint, I'm just painting over it. So you can use the same paint even to do details or shadows and go over it, and if you add a little more water you can let the layer below come through a little bit. Let's make a shape. I don't want it to have definite lines, so I will be doing what I call moving the puddle. This is a way of putting the color down in your paper and it won't leave any streaks, or you won't be able to tell where you started to put the colors down. And when it's dry, it looks like this. Let's do it again, this time with a sketch below. You just move the puddle of colored water covering the surface you want to fill. And you can take advantage when it's still wet to add another color so it mixes seamlessly. And another way of doing a seamless wash of color is putting the water down first and adding your color on top of it before it dries. So you put the water without any color and then you add on the color. It usually looks different when the colors dry. They look different when they're wet, and you get used to it very quickly once you start painting. And with practice it's easy to take that into account, planning your colors out, because it rarely looks the same when it's wet than when it is dry. Either way, if you don't want it to have lines or blotches, leave it be. And if you keep coming back, you will probably damage the paper or make it look more opaque, so it's better just to let it dry. Once it's dry, I go back in again and paint with a deeper tone. I'm using the same color, but I actually chose a rose to paint because I think it's a good example, because you get similar tones or variations of the same color to do the shadows and like show you a little bit how I do it. There are many ways to do it. This is one of the ways, and you can take advantage when it's still wet to add different tones or more color so it looks deeper. And that's one of the nice things about watercolor, I think. It's that if you let it dry and if you let the water like mix the colors and you don't move it too much and you don't rely only on your brushwork, you can get really nice effects and it can look really cool, and you can take full advantage of using watercolor. You've probably heard people say that it's better to go from light to dark with watercolors, and the reason they say that it's that it's so much easier to build up than take it off once you've gone to dark, and you can always make it more intense later if you want. Here you can see that I'm barely touching the paper. I don't need to bend the brush or push hard. The painting will absorb on its own. You actually have a little playtime. You can take it off with a tissue if you've put too much, and if you overwork it, it will look muddy and you can stain or damage the paper. If you want it to look bright, it's better not to overwork it. Also make sure to change your water. Your colors can change if the water is dirty, especially the lighter ones. Another tip would be to make sure your paint is well dissolved and that you put it all over your brush, and when you go to the paper, it's not dripping. I usually start from the top left of my page just because I don't want to rest my hand on anything that hasn't dried yet. I usually like to rest my hand while I'm painting. And another way is to put a paper towel, which I recommend using in case of any mistakes or anything, but also so you can rest your hand so you don't smudge your painting. Maybe you can tell from this illustration, but I don't really have a plan. I just keep looking at it and see if it needs more color or more shadows. Where you leave the little puddle of water, it will usually, if there's still a lot of water with color, it will dry darker, so you can also take advantage of that. I recommend you experiment and just see how the water dries naturally and make use of the stains. They're pretty cool. These are just some of the things that I thought might be useful. I've taught a couple of watercolor workshops, and my students were usually afraid of adding too much water and the colors looking too light. But with these tips I mentioned, you can always add more and keep on experimenting. So I hope you like this, and thank you very much for watching. Remember that I also upload videos in Spanish if you don't want to watch them in English at my Ponycats channel. And you can follow me on Instagram to see more of my illustrations. Bye!